Aloha. This Traditions of the Pacific lecture is titled Another Legacy of Hawaii's Voyaging Chiefs, Models of Successful Leadership, presented by Dr. Kēhaunani Abad. This lecture was recorded on November 14th, 2013.
Mahalo nui, Diane. Aloha no kākou. I better get right into it, given our technical difficulties. Mahalo for the patience and for being such gracious folks while we figured out our problems. This is about as good as it gets. The left and the right is cut off, and hope you guys can bear with it. So, we hear a lot about our voyaging chiefs, and they are indeed esteemed in our history, our culture, our mo'olelo. There's so much about them that often gets stated in terms of what they bring to Hawaii, things like the large pahu and different practices of the kapu and different kinds of gods that they bring, different kinds of technology. But one of the things that rarely gets cited is that in that milieu of all of these voyaging chiefs arriving to Hawaii and figuring different things out, what gets laid down is a template for what becomes traditionally the most ideal traits and practices of our chiefly society. And it really comes out of this era. So that's the story that we're going to share tonight. We think about all of these cultural peaks, and I'm reminded, being here at Bishop Museum, of a display that used to be in Hawaiian Hall, if you folks remember coming into it, cultural peaks that Dr. Kilolani Mitchell had put together, right? And it was a wonderful display of various kinds of cultural peaks. And one that I thought about in later years that was missing, and I'm sure, Dr. Kilolani, you would agree that this could be added. Kuali'i, the sense of ali'i-ness, how to rule, how to lead. And what our people had achieved at that time was really a very high standard of leadership. And it comes again out of this voyaging era. So it's really a kind of high point in our societal development that often doesn't get as much attention as all of these other kinds of wonderful things that we can look to our kupuna for. Where I'm getting this information comes from our mo'olelo. So let me begin with just telling you a little bit of our sources. And as we know, our kakao olelo, the different kinds of historians within the courts, they were experts of the highest degree. Imagine someone being trained from even younger than what you're seeing here, trained, specially picked, those who could apo that information, that ike, and just hang on to it and organize it and synthesize it. And if your child was of that sort, they might be pulled into this very small circle and trained from moment one to learn of these histories, to learn of these oli and mele and mo'oku auhau, our genealogies, and to understand the significance of these. And so by the time you get to the 1800s, when the kahea goes out to everyone to share the mo'olelo. In our nupepa at the time, these mo'olelo, these stories, these histories, they were purposely being culled from the collective memory of our people. And so you have within the nupepa one of the richest sources of history of any native peoples, really worldwide. And through these sources, we have the record of what was, not the entire record, of course. I'm sure there are tons of parts of these mo'olelo and mo'oku auhau that we miss, but there's an incredible wealth that was captured. And what's interesting is the fact that in many ways, this oral tradition, as opposed to a written tradition, in some ways has more veracity than even a written tradition. And the reason for that is because, not only were there these skilled folks who knew that their life or death relied on getting it right. Yeah, iko olelo no keola, iko olelo no kamake. We know about the standard that these folks were held to. In the word there is life, in the word there is death. So we know that they took it very seriously, in other words. But beyond that, it's hard to erase the reality of history that you and you and you and I know. It's easy to wipe out a collection in the library, burn those books, and they're gone forever. But when we have multiple court historians on multiple islands who are given that kuleana, the very serious kuleana of remembering these, it's hard to get away with not being accurate. Someone's going to call you on it. You can't get away with that. And so we have a very strong set of sources that we're pulling from. So I just wanted to give a nod to those sources. And of course, what we're talking about are folks like, the main historians being people like Kamakau and Haleole and Malo and Kepelino and I'i, many, many others in the Nupepa. So in trying to get a handle on this, just so you know, okay, so when I'm starting to throw things up on the screen, they were organized using a database, so it's not like my head, because there's no way I could begin to capture and know what they knew, right? So I was taking notes for days and years and and holding it in a database. So I think of my database, I came here with my little security blanket, this ancient computer that still has my old database in it, but I keep it because this is, I joke that this is my equivalent of one of those maybe junior mo'oku au hau folks in the court. And so what's captured in there, it might be, what the neophyte guy might have known. In any case, that's where it's coming from. So it's how I kind of came, oh shucks, the names are cut off. So on the far left are the names of some of our most famous voyaging chiefs. And they come really from two sets of brothers, Nana Ulu and Ulu. Some of the most famous of these are Hema and Kaha'inuia Hema, Olopana, Mo'ikeha, Kila, Kaha'i Ho'okamali'i, Paumakua, Lon Ho'oneva, Paumakua, Hua Nui Kalala Ila'i, La'amai Kahiki, Pili. These are familiar names to many of you in the room, I'm sure. Let me just tell you a little bit about them before we start learning about how they emulate these wonderful traits of kuali'i. Our voyaging chiefs, one of the maybe misnomers or misconceptions about them is the thought that they came in two distinct waves, as if, it was, here everybody comes today, and then, whoa, all of a sudden, a new set of people and a sudden arrival of a second wave. And what we find is that when you read the Mo'olelo and you look at the Mo'oku'auhau, the genealogies, to see how these folks line up within the different generations, there are, if you interpret this chart here, what's happening is that there are 10 different genealogies that I was taking a look at. If you trace down from the first voyager to the last voyager, the genealogy doesn't, of course, just cover the voyaging years, right? The genealogy covers more years than the voyaging chiefs. But if you pull the chiefs out, the voyaging chiefs out, that's what you get on the last row. There are at least 19, or maybe in the most conservative view, 13 generations of chiefs that are voyaging. So there's a mix of people that are coming in over a long span of time. Take a pause and think about 19 generations. That's a long time for different waves of folks to come. So it doesn't really happen in a 1-2 kind of surprise second wave. Now let's learn a little bit about them. Well, what we find is that when you look at the mo'olelo, that red bar, okay, let me explain what's going on here. So the first generation you have on the far left, is Wakea and Papa. So a great place to start, right? Just to kind of give ourselves an orientation of time. If that's Wakea and Papa, and if you look at the genealogy, some 60 generations later is our time. Now there's a whole lot that we know about from the earlier point, but it's really more of the kind of cosmogonic genealogies, and you don't get the same sense that you do when you hit ulu and nano ulu, and then when you hit the era of Punna, Maveke, Paumakua, sort of midpoint, where the red line starts. That's when the oral traditions start becoming super specific. It's as if somebody in the court decided, okay, we're going to start remembering all of this and getting it all down in our heads. So there's an era where everything is really pa'aloa, and if you start from that period of, like I said, Punna-ish, Maveke-ish, to the time of Kamehameha, it spans 23 generations, and that's where I dove in for my own dissertation research. However, the green line, starting with Ulu and Nana Ulu, and ending 5 generations into the red line, that's the era of the voyaging chiefs. And it closes out with people like Kaha'i and La'amai Kahiki. They're some of the last voyagers to come to Hawaii, as far as our mo'olelo can reveal to us. So in that span where the green and the red overlaps, that's kind of the story that we're going to start exploring. We okay? Okay, Mikai. So first, another different part another approach that's going to be a little different than how you might normally hear about mo'olelo is that, we typically think about mo'olelo as an episode or a specific story about one specific chief, or sometimes we see them as maybe a set of related mo'olelo. But what's wonderful when you have an ability to look at a whole lot of information all at once, and you start putting it together, and you see that, well, how do all these mo'olelo relate about all these people? A very different image starts to emerge. Those are the same elements that you just saw. And this is a metaphor for what we're going to try and do in this talk. You see how there's pattern in pattern now? So when you start putting together the different episodes and you connect them up, there are different kinds of things that emerge that you can see. And that's sort of what the beauty is of being able to take a look at that much information at once. And what starts showing up is that there are some basic branches of our mo'oku'auhau, of our different chiefs. And from these two brothers, Ulu and Nana Ulu, come different lines of chiefs that really are the progenitors of the various islands. And as you hear their stories, what emerges is a very huge challenge in that era of that green and red overlap. Yeah? Towards the end of the migratory period, when you can imagine a lot of the island areas have been settled, and there aren't a whole lot of open, free areas to go to, there comes a challenge of how are we all going to share this area and live together, especially when there's so many different lineages among us. Remember, 19 generations of people coming in. And, how is this going to work? So there's a challenge of who's in charge? How do we do this? And a huge conflict, in internal conflict of two primary ways of thinking kind of butting up against each other. Of course, there's always the deference given to a senior line. And in this case, a senior line is a Ulu lineage. But there's always the notion, too, that someone who has been associated with a place the longest has a special kind of standing there. And that was the Nana Ulu lineage, the junior lineage. So, how is this going to play out? And there was a problem. Among the different chiefs, because it wasn't that clear who's in charge, there is not that accountability. If we were all different chiefs, right, there's not an accountability of one of us to another. Who's gonna be the arbiter to say, I was wrong and I got to make amends? And if I'm the bad chief and I'm not treating my makainana well, or maybe I'm not following the kinds of couple I should be, who's enforcing that on me, right? And so there's all these sort of questions that actually led to open conflict. And there were raids of islands against islands. And in the first few generations, again, in that overlap period, that it got pretty hairy at times. There are 3 solutions that come out of this era that, again, lay the foundation for some of our most ideal traits of kuali'i that we think of today. The ahali'i. So let me pass out something. Oh, shucks. That's okay. There's a poster that I think I left in my husband's car. That's all right. So if you imagine the different generations of the chiefs, remember the red line? I said there's 23 generations where we have a lot of rich information about what's going on. So Haho is in the very beginning of that era and is in that overlap, and he lives on Maui, and his father had just come from Kahiki. And so they're very much in that new zone. And what he establishes is this ahali'i. And the ahali'i, let's pretend we're the ahali'i. The ahali'i determined in its mechanism who among us had what sort of standing, and it was based on genealogy. And so you can imagine this was the invention, so to speak, of the Ulu lineage. Yeah, because the Ulu guys were the guys who came from the senior lineage. And what made it work was that they instituted that sense of inter-accountability to each other, and then if I'm accountable to what I'm supposed to do, then therefore I will take care of the makainana properly too. So that allowed for it to succeed for the most part. And I say for the most part because you'll hear in the stories that not everybody appreciated this way of ordering things, right? Using our genealogy to determine who's who, what's what. So let's kind of just hold that thought. So the ahali'i, it was an invention that began to establish some good sense of order, right? It was at least one set of rules that most people could agree upon. So that was a good start. And we see the classic version of it in years later, right? It doesn't go away. It persists all the way through Kamehameha's, in this case, what's referred to as his ahaula, his very core part of that ahali'i. Oh, let me pause here. As you can see in the corner, this is all of the illustrations, the artwork that I'm using tonight is by courtesy of Kamehameha Publishing and Brooke Kapu Kuniahi Parker, the wonderful artist who created all of this. So props to Brooke and big mahalo to them. This is the court of Kakuhiheva, his hale at Pamoa in Kailua. And it's this sort of place where the ahali'i is gathering and enjoying and having times to not just be serious, but to also support the arts. So this is its later rendition, its evolution. Now, linked very closely with the ahali'i and a specific story that brings out how the ahali'i proved to be successful is this other solution of heiau. Heiau, as was used in this time period, was really an incredible invention. And we have to think of it as that, right? These are people doing different things that had never been done before. So this may be familiar to many of you. Yeah, we are on what island? Moko Keawe. And we're in Kohala, a place very near and dear to my family and me. And this is Mo'okini Heiau. So this is the heiau of Pa'ao and Pili. Pa'ao, the kahuna nui of Pili, the high chief. Pa'ao and Pili both come here from Kahiki. They're definitely of that Ulu side. And they are new chiefs to the island. And somehow miraculously, they are able to, in the end of the story, rule the island. And there is no battle that occurs. that they don't take the island by force. So what's going on? Because how could that work, right? Well, Pili immediately institutes this notion of ahali'i, and I can imagine it. He's trying to say, okay, how many of you guys are in on this? Let's get together. Let's make this work. Here's a set of ways that we can operate together. And he must have got a lot of support. And how do we know it? This is the evidence. So while there are many pohaku, and anybody who knows that terrain knows there's plenty pohaku over there. But these pohaku came from Pololu, far away, and many valleys that go like this in between. Up, down, up, down. And how did they all get there, all these pohaku? Now imagine these walls, we're in a helicopter, right? This is over 200 meters. No, I better use yards. Yeah, yards, sorry. 200 yards long. The walls at the base, at its thickest, are some 30 feet wide. The walls at its height, at the highest points, are 20 feet tall. And if any of you guys have ever tried to, move pohaku, and I have very little in my life tried to do that, but this is incredible, the amount of labor that was put into this. So, and these come from, again, Pololu. So what does that say? If all of us are lined up, hand to hand, passing this from Pololu to Mo'okini, or to Upolu area where this is at, or Kokoiki side where this is at. Well, it says that thousands of us are with the program. And the leaders among us have their act together, because how do you logistically organize all these people to do this? I mean, just figuring out the lunch for these guys, right? And figuring out the work schedule and who's on break when, and yeah, mind-boggling. So somebody has their act together. A lot of people have their act together, and they're all coordinated in this way that connects them to their akua. Wow, that's powerful. So if you were some Nanaulu chiefs in Ka'u, perhaps, would you want to take on Pili? Maybe not. Yeah, maybe not. And in fact, that's what happened. He wasn't challenged. Now, in later generations, that doesn't mean the Ka'u chiefs just rolled over. They're just waiting for the right time. This might not be the right time. This guy seems to have a lot of support. And so, in fact, the benefits of this sort of heiau construction were very clear to everybody. And all of these sorts of mana'o that are on the screen really bring out the point of what they were doing. So in creating these heiau, they're bringing people together. They're figuring out, what is the base of our support, or solidifying that base of support. And they're able to display that to everyone. And by displaying that to everyone, they deter aggression, and they build mana for that group. Now, a different kind of solution to the problem were strategic marriages and connections through the keiki of these marriages. And this is where I it's like most fascinating to me. Let me go through some storytelling. So, like I was saying, when the Nanaulu chiefs were in this position, they weren't very pleased with it, right? And they're bucking it in ways that they can, and they're waiting for their right time. A really great example of this is what was going on with the Moloka'i Nanaulu chiefs. So if you look sort of in the center, so coming down from Nanaulu, the diagonal dotted line, you see Kamauaua. He's a li'inui of Moloka'i. And he sees around him on Hawai'i Island people like Pili from the Ulu line, establishing himself, some other chiefs on in fact on Maui especially, establishing themselves. And he raises his sons, no doubt, with this fierce allegiance for the Nanaulu families and their rights to, as the first on these islands, to be in charge, to rule. It's their kuleana. Kaupe'epe'e, the elder, establishes a fort at Haupu. This is way yuka of Pelekunu in Wailau over there. And he will engage in raid upon raid, very successful raids on the other island Ulu chiefs. Well, eventually, and it's read this story that the version that Kalakaua tells. It's wonderful. But Kaupe'epe'e will eventually get into a battle with none other than Kēhaunani Abad, because he steals Hina from the court of Hakananileo in Hilo. And with Hina gone for all of these years, and so, to the point where the sons get big enough, Kēhaunani Abad, these famous champions extraordinaire, Kaupe'epe'e is eventually defeated. Well, Keolo Ewa, his younger brother, will marry Nu'akea, who is the sister of Kaupe'epe'e's kahuna nui, Moi. You see Moi on the far right. So that was in one way, just to make sure that within the family everything's okay, right? Like, so even there, that's a strategic mating. So Kaupe'epe'e's kahuna nui, Moi, the sister of Moi, Nu'akea, is who Keolo Ewa marries, to make sure that the administrations of both sides of the family are pa'a. And in the later years, what you'll see is that Hawai'i Island will seek out Hualani. So Pili, remember we just talked about Pili, yeah? 4 generations down, you see Ku Kohou, Kaniyuhi, Kanipahu. Kanipahu will marry Hualani. And it's from there that will come a string of Moloka'i chiefs that will forever keep close ties with Hawai'i Island. Hawaii and Moloka'i chiefs actually are really, really pili. Now, if we continue on, this one's a little easier. So on Hawai'i Island, remember we were saying, okay, so Pili does well in his time. But by the time you get to Kanipahu's era, he ends up having a big battle with Kama'iole. And Kama'iole wins. Kanipahu has to flee. Hence, that's why he's hooking up with Hualani. Yeah. So that was actually a really smart move on his part to find a different wahine where he might find some asylum. But that's not the interesting part of this story. What's going on here is that when Kalapana, Kanipahu's son, comes of age, he takes over, defeats Kama'iole. Well, Kanipahu and Kalapana defeat Kama'iole. And the person that Kalapana marries is Kama'iole's niece. Makea Malama. And from them comes Kaha'imoilea. So it's really from this point on that Hawai'i Islands, Nanaulu and Ulu chiefs become one. And this was very, very purposeful, as you can see here. And so all of the different descendants, like Liloa and Umi and everybody else from Hawai'i Island, descend from both Nanaulu and Ulu lineage chiefs. And so by the time that you're out of that overlap of the green and the red, they got it together, and there's not that strain between Ulu and Nanaulu anymore, because they have made it all one, purposefully, very, very purposefully. Now, if you were to look at kind of in the, now pulling out, this is the part of the talk where I'm trying to do that, like with those triangles. Now take a look back and kind of see what they all look like together. When you start looking at the different ali'i over those 23 generations where there was that red line, yeah, where there's really rich information. There are certain chiefs that stand out. And when you look at what was going on, you see that, I'm trying to do this quickly. If you guys have questions, please raise your hand or I'm happy to answer later. But what's happening is that what's most interesting to me is that when you have a whole lot of really good chiefs, immediately after what gets kicked off is a lot of warfare. And this is what, see that back end? That's what we really hear most about. When we remember our history, we go to those eras of all these wars among the different chiefs. But there's an era before that that's a lot more peaceful and where there's a lot more exemplary chiefly behavior. But what I do want to show, okay, wait, quick way to do this. Let me just get into it. So you know those black and gray bars? So the black bars are aggression that's happening internal within an island. So a chief's, those who are under a chief rebelling, or a chief needing to put down somebody for some reason, but there's an internal war. The gray bars are wars that are going outside of the island. And where you see a lot of this kicked off begins with this era of Umi, who's in the center. He comes from a very difficult time where his father, Liloa, who's pictured on the far right, leaves him the role of the war god, Kukailimoku, but gives his elder brother the rule of the Aupuni, the governance, the government itself. Hakau is that elder, more sacred, higher-ranking brother. And when he does so, when Liloa splits the rule like this, it has to do with the fact that he has, unlike in years past, so what's happening is that there's an evolution of the different kinds of problems that are occurring at this point, right? So they solve certain kinds of problems, and now new ones are emerging. In this era, we have the reality of the chief who should be chief not being the best guy, and that's Hakau. Father Liloa recognizing that, well, I have to give Hakau the nod in some way, give him a chance. He's the rightful heir. But I want to provide my people some insurance in case it doesn't go well. So let me empower Umi in some way. Well, long story short, Umi has to take over. He has to fight Hakau. He has all of the kahuna behind him. He has a makainana behind him because indeed Hakau turns out to be a very, very poor ruler who doesn't take care of the gods, who doesn't take care of the kahuna pule, all of the priests. He doesn't take care of his people. He's very jealous of everyone who's beautiful, all kinds of horrible things. And so Umi takes over through force in some instances, right? Immediately with Hakau, and those Ka'u chiefs again, just like in the earlier era, they're not having it, and it stems from some of those really old conflicts on that island between the Nana Ulu and Ulu lineages, and so here we have Imai Kalani saying, "No, I'm not gonna succumb to you, Umi," and so he has to be taken out too. Now, that's not the way that Umi really wants to operate, to take over the whole place through force. So what he does, and I'm finally getting to the point, we were talking about one of those wonderful ideal approaches, which was strategic marriages. And so what Umi does is rely upon what worked well in previous generations. And he engages in these strategic marriages. He marries Kapukini, one of Liloa's keiki. Pi'ikea, who is the highest ranking chiefess on Maui under the ruler Pi'ilani. Hena, and Mokuahualeakea. And all of these relate to previous rulers of Hawaii Island. And in doing so, he's able to hold it all together in his generation. He doesn't have any more wars after that. After Imai Kalani, that was it. But what it kicks off, and this is where those gray and black bars come in. What it kicks off is in later generations, all of that internal strife, because what you have is a whole lot of people a whole lot of chiefs who can all lay claim to a similar kuleana. We are all great-grandchildren of Umi, and I through this mother, you through that mother, me with my faction here in Ka'u, you with your faction in Hilo, you with your faction in Kohala. All of us have different bases of support, and so there's this problem that occurs. I think what's instructive here, though, for us, kind of looking again, pulling out and seeing the big picture, is that what's working for them from previous generations, they're applying a solution, right? Let's engage in these marriages to hold things together. In this new, more complex scenario, it really lays the seeds for new problems. But at the heart of it, there's this notion of let's always find a way to maybe get close, not always fight, right? Let's see how we can bring ourselves together. And so they'll continue to rely on this in later years. Heiau construction will continue. And take a look at this. I find this really, really beautiful in a lot of ways. So if you can imagine that this desire to make connections, these meaningful strategic connections with other people, is really a way to reach out and say, let's not fight. Yeah, let's love, not war. Let's not fight. Look at how many times they chose that approach. Yeah, these are chiefs who had maybe not just their own first chiefly or chiefess who might have been within their immediate circle, but who reached out to more than one spouse. Yeah, so all of the yellow bars are ali'i nui who had more than one spouse. And you see how they kind of mirror? The more conflict there is, the more they're trying to rely on something to hold it together and apply this. Not only are they applying this just in terms of another spouse, but they're purposely going to other islands and reaching out to kind of widen that circle. Yeah. So were they only trying to build up armies and only trying to fight and only trying to gain more, kind of beat your chest kind of action? No. And so to me, this is a really significant difference in what we often think about our chiefs. Yep, and that's the point that I was trying to make earlier with Umi, that it kicks off a problem. It does by Umi having all of these wives. He has 6 official wives, right? And from all of these high-ranking chiefs, it lays the seeds for a problem. And so you're right. You're 100% right. It's creating a problem, but now let me show you how it's also creating a solution. So really astute analysis of what's there, and I agree 100%. I want to make 2 points. One, it's significant to know that they were looking for solutions that did not entail conflict. Yeah. Let's find ways that will not entail outright warfare. Yeah. Let's find ways to subdue those wars. And our chiefesses played a huge role in this strategy, as you can imagine. Klani Kauleleaivi was the woman pictured in the last slide. And let me share a quick story here that will illustrate why these strategic meetings made a difference and how they avoided wars. So you had a situation where Kēkaulike of Maui raids the Kona Kohala coast. And the ruler at the time, Alapa'i Nui, of course, has to defend his people and met out some type of revenge for this raid. And so he's poised to go to Maui. He's got all his warriors set up at Kokoiki, ready to go over. And side note, that's the moment at which Kamehameha was born. But he prepares and launches his fleet. They go to Maui, and what they find is that Kēkaulike is on his deathbed. Some say he already died, and so there's not a reason for war, especially since Kēkaulike very smartly places not Kauhi'aimoku, who's Kēkaulike's firstborn son from his Maui chiefess wife. Kauhi'aimoku is who's falling off of the left side of the screen. Everyone would have thought Kēkaulike would have made Kauhi'aimoku the li'inui, but Kamehameha Nui ends up being the li'inui. So you see Kamehameha Nui coming off of Keku'iapuiwa. Now, why was that a brilliant move? Well, because when Alapa'i comes over, rather than having a war, they have a tremendous ha'aina to celebrate the induction of Kamehameha Nui, Alapa'i's own nephew, as the li'inui. By having these sort of relationships, it afforded you opportunities to call these relationships into action and then to pedestal these relationships. Oh yes, in the short time that I have, there's very, very little ability for me to go into other. But the low chiefs, for instance, if Ma'ili Kukahi, who comes out of Lihue, is perhaps my personal favorite chief. He is amazing, and of course, and there's so many. Besides the three behaviors that I was highlighting, there are many things that we can look to Ma'ili Kukahi for as really the progenitor of it. For instance, centralized authority and localized autonomy, the Ahupua'a system. That was really Ma'ili Kukahi's genius. And of course, that proliferated throughout the Pai'aina very quickly. On Kauai, we have, at the very beginning, they didn't wait 5 generations later. At the very beginning, they start hooking up the Puna family and Mo'ikeha, and they're contemporaneous with Pili and Haho. The Nanaulu and Ulu lineage hook up right away on Kauai. So you have the Puna family and the Mo'ikeha family marrying off right away. And that's why one of the reasons they say, Hemolele Kauai Kamalie, because they never had these wars. And it's not until way later that they start having some conflicts with the Kavelo family, the Kavelo Maihuna Ali'i and Kavelo Aikanaka and all those guys battling. But yeah, for the most part, Kauai is just malie, so they can be as productive and abundant as possible. So sorry, I know I don't mean to give those islands short shrift. But back, when you look at this story of what's going on in Maui and Hawaii, you see that there is that seed of successful outcome that's planted when you have these relationships. Similarly, in the instance that could have resulted in the biggest battle ever, let me do a time check. Are we out of time already? I know we started late. Let me then do a very short version of this story. So when Kamehameha Nui and Alapa'i are having their aha'aina and enjoying themselves, what happens is Ha'o from Molokai arrives on the scene. Now Ha'o is one of the descendants of Kanipahu and Hualani, one of the folks from Hawai'i Island chiefs and Molokai chiefesses. And when Ha'o comes, he says, cousins, and he is cousins with both the Maui side and the Hawai'i Island side, can you help me? Kapi'ioho Kalani of Oahu has just come and raided our island. And we need help defending our island. And the Maui guys say, I don't know if we can do that. We just raided Kona and Kohala. And we're sort of spent. But immediately Alapa'i jumps in, right? We were about to have a war and we didn't get to have one. And all our guys are like raring to go. So yes, let's go. So they went to Molokai and took care of Kapi'ioho Kalani. He dies. And Oahu is left right now with a 5-year-old Kanaho Kalani as heir. And Alapa'i guys think, oh, well, hey, we're on a roll over here. Maybe we just, keep on going. Now, it may sound a little greedy. What you have to keep in mind, what Alapa'i is thinking about, and this gets to your point, when you have all these many, many, many high chiefs under you, there's pressure for you to give them appropriate roles. You cannot give this super high chief from this really great chiefess some, little kuleana. So what's pushing them out to these other islands is the need to give their high chiefs appropriate stature and appropriate roles. Yeah, they're trained to be ali'e moku. They need a moku, not a little ahupua'a. So he's like, okay, we're on a roll. Let's go to Oahu. Kanaho Kalani. Maybe we could do some good things over there. He's only a 5-year-old. What he didn't have in mind was that, as we know, Oahu and Kauai chiefs are very pili. And Peleioholani of Kauai and of Oahu arrives on the scene ahead of time, hearing the news, right? Oh my goodness, I got to help my nephew. I got to go hurry back to Oahu. So when Alapa'i on the left arrives on the scene, Peleioholani's already there. And so you have assembled warriors from Molokai, Hawaii, Kauai, and Oahu ready to do battle. Really, nobody wants to do battle. None of them had planned to take on this sort of conflict. And they're looking for a good way out. Who comes to their aid? Na'ili. Na'ili, who is a high chief of Wai'anae. And there he is, sort of, you see him sort of first, second, third, fourth row down. And what Na'ili points out is that Alapa'i, can you see Alapa'i who's to the left of Na'ili, Peleioholani who's to the right. Na'ili is the peacemaker, and he gives everybody the way out of this. He reminds everyone, as you all know, we are family here. And why are they family? Well, Peleioholani and Alapa'i share as a mate kamaka'i moku. And in fact, Alapa'i's war general, Kalani Opu'u, you see him over here, he's actually the son of Peleioholani. Let me say that again. Yeah, so our chiefs and chiefesses were purposely going out and engaging in diplomatic relations with one another, having children with one another in order to maintain this type of closeness that you can call upon that may avoid conflict, as in this instance. So Kamaka'i Moku was enjoying some time on Oahu. at which point she was in the court where she mated with, had some enjoyable moments with Peleoholani in her younger days. Born of that was Kalaniʻopuʻu, who is raised on Hawai'i Island, where she returns to. So as Kalaniʻopuʻu matures, he's raised in the court of Hawaii. He's now in the army of Alapa'i. And so Alapa'i, one war leader, or one ali'inui, and Peleoholani have very much in common. And so that day, Na'ili points all of these things out. Oops. And all ends peacefully there on the beach at No'oneala'a. Everyone spends a little bit of time kind of just recuperating on Oahu, and they leave peacefully. So what could have been the worst battle ever in the history of our Pai'aina ended peacefully, thanks to these sort of relationships that they were able to call upon. So, as we kind of close out tonight, I thought I'd leave you with some questions, just for us to kind of ponder when we think about, Hawaii. What does this tell us today? What are the ha'awina that we can derive from this? Well, ahali'i, we knew they worked, right? And they were, if we think about, well, what are our modern versions of ahali'i? Do we have them? Should we have them? What scale are they at? Because we know that people gather, right? Coalitions, collaborations, different kinds of entities get together and they work together. Are we doing enough like that? What are our modern day ahali'i? Anybody building heiau today? Real heiau, metaphorical heiau. What are we doing to build heiau? Anybody building them? For what purposes? And again, especially when we think metaphorically, right? What are we doing in this sort of way to pull our resources, to pull our mana toward a common goal? And what sort of networks are we creating? I mean, it doesn't work for us to marry 5 folks, but what are those strategic relationships that we're establishing? And what are the keiki that come of those relationships? Because that was very critical, right? A keiki was born of this, something so precious to both sides. What keiki are we bearing as we create these relationships? Who's doing these things? So these are some of the lessons that were saved for us, very carefully and preciously saved for us in the 1800s by all those mo'oku auhau and kakau mo'olelo who made sure we knew these stories, had these mo'oku auhau, because they knew there was value in it. And what are we to take from them today? So just some thoughts for us as we close. Mahalo nui.
Mahalo for listening. If you have any questions or comments on this or other online audio programs, please visit us online at www.bishopmuseum.org. If you like us on Facebook, you'll be alerted when new programs are available. A hui hou from the Bishop Museum.